The conference hall on Axiom Prime Station stretched larger than any cathedral on Earth. Its walls were made of some material that shifted colors with the mood of the speakers, a technology humans still didn't fully understand. Today, those walls pulsed with reds and oranges, the colors of tension and barely controlled anger. Ambassador Day sat at the human delegation table, his hands folded calmly on the smooth surface before him. He was 63 years old, with silver hair cut military short and eyes that had seen too many negotiations end badly. To his left sat Commander Gina, the youngest fleet commander in human history at 37. She wore her dress uniform, every medal earned in 3 border skirmishes with pirates and raiders. To his right, Dr. Taesung adjusted his glasses nervously, his tablet filled with biological data on every species in the room. They were alone among giants. The Valrothi representative floated in its containment field, a being of pure crystalline thought form that sparkled like a living diamond. It had existed for over 3,000 years and governed an empire spanning 400 worlds. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a sound that made human teeth ache. "We have deliberated for 6 months," the Valrothi said. "The conclusion is unanimous. Humanity has become a destabilizing force in the galactic community." Day said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence was often more powerful than words. The Threnoid ambassador stood next, its forearms gesturing in patterns that its translator device turned into words. The Threnoids looked like insects, but thought like computers, every decision calculated through probability matrices. "Your expansion rate exceeds acceptable parameters by 300%. Your military growth is exponential and unpredictable. Your cultural philosophy promotes individual achievement over collective harmony. These factors create risk." Around the massive circular table, 17 other species nodded or made their equivalent gestures of agreement. Some looked apologetic. Others looked smug. All of them had voted the same way. Therefore, the Valrothi continued, "Humanity must accept the following terms to remain in the Galactic Concordance." The terms appeared on holographic displays before each delegation. Day read them without changing expression, though he felt Gina stiffen beside him. Taesung made a small sound, like someone had punched him in the stomach. 70% of human colonies must be surrendered to Concordance administration. The human fleet must be reduced by 80%, with all remaining vessels subject to Concordance oversight. Human expansion must cease entirely for a period of not less than 500 standard years. All human scientific research must be shared with Concordance authorities before publication. Humans would be reclassified as a developing species with limited voting rights and no veto power. In essence, humanity would become a vassal state. They would exist at the mercy and pleasure of species who had decided humans were too dangerous to be trusted as equals. The Valrothi's voice softened, almost kind. "We understand this is difficult, but understand, humanity is young. You have been spacefaring for only 150 years. We have maintained galactic peace for 10,000 years. This is for the good of all, including your own people." The Kresh ambassador, a being that looked like a cross between a bear and a boulder, added its voice. "Many of us have come to value human friendship. Your music, your stories, your strange foods. But friendship and political equality are different matters. Surely you see the wisdom in accepting guidance from your elders?" They let the silence stretch. Around the table, aliens shifted in their seats or their force fields or their gravity wells. They had expected anger. They had expected threats. They had expected desperate negotiation. They had not expected silence. Finally, after 6 hours of speeches explaining why humanity must submit, the Valrothi gave Day permission to speak. "Ambassador Day, you may now present humanity's response." Day stood slowly. He was not a tall man, barely average height even among humans. But something about the way he rose made the vast chamber seem smaller. He straightened his suit jacket, a simple black garment that looked primitive next to the flowing energy clothes and biosuits of other delegates. He looked around the room, meeting eyes and optical sensors and consciousness fields. He wanted each of them to see his face clearly for what came next. "We respectfully decline," Day said, his voice steady and clear. "Goodbye." He turned and walked toward the exit. Gina and Taesu rose immediately, following him without question. Their footsteps echoed in the suddenly silent chamber. "Ambassador, wait." The crushed delegate rose from its seat. "You cannot simply leave. This is a formal concordance proceeding. We must reach an agreement." Day didn't stop walking or turn around. "We just did. We agree to disagree. This is irregular." The Threnoid's translator device made its voice shrill with alarm. "Protocol requires 3 rounds of negotiation before any delegation may withdraw." "File a complaint," Gina said over her shoulder, her hand resting on the ceremonial weapon at her belt. The doors opened before them, responding to their approach. Beyond lay the docking corridor where the human ships waited. Day could see his aide, young Jay, standing by the entrance with their belongings already packed. "You are making a grave mistake." The Velrothi's voice boomed through the hall now, no longer kind. "The Concordance has ways of enforcing its decisions. You cannot simply opt out of galactic civilization." Day paused for just a moment at the threshold. He looked back at the assembled representatives of the most powerful civilizations in known space. Beings who controlled thousands of worlds. Species that had mastered technologies humans barely understood. Powers that had shaped the galaxy for millennia. "Watch us," he said. Then he stepped through the door. It closed behind the 3 humans with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. In the conference hall, chaos erupted. Delegates shouted and buzzed and transmitted in a dozen languages. The Velrothi's crystalline form pulsed with colors no human had names for. The carefully maintained order of 10,000 years had just been challenged in a way none of them had protocols for. Aboard the human flagship Determination, Day stood on the bridge as the docking clamps released. Captain Su Min looked at him with respect mixed with concern. "Orders, sir?" "Take us home, Captain. All human vessels are to depart immediately. Full communications blackout. No one speaks to anyone outside human space without direct authorization from Terra. And if they try to follow us, they won't." Day settled into the observer's seat, suddenly feeling every one of his 63 years. Not yet. Right now, they're too confused. They've never had anyone just walk away before. Gina stood beside him, watching through the view screen as Axiom Prime grew smaller behind them. "Sir, they'll come eventually. They can't let this stand. I know." Day closed his eyes. "But by the time they decide what to do about us, we'll be ready." "Ready for what?" Day opened his eyes and smiled, expression with no humor in it. "Ready to show them exactly what happens when you try to chain humanity." The human ships jumped to hyperspace, leaving the station and its shocked delegates behind. In that moment, the galaxy changed, though no one fully understood it yet. The talking was over. Now came the trembling. 3 months passed like a held breath. On the Concordance, intelligence station orbiting the neutral world of Meridian, analyst Eunice stared at her displays until her eyes burned. She had spent 15 years studying human behavior, learning their languages, reading their history. She understood them better than most of her people, which wasn't saying much. Humans confused everyone, but what she saw now in the data streams frightened her more than any war fleet. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered, pulling up another report. Her supervisor, an elderly Velrothi named Curator Fell, floated closer to examine her screen. Explain. Yuna highlighted sections of the intelligence feed. Human colony worlds along their border. New Pyongyang, Port Taijon, Bizen Station. They're evacuating. Not in panic, nothing rushed. But civilian populations are being relocated deeper into human territory. Millions of people moving in organized waves. Perhaps they fear retaliation for their insult at the summit. That's what I thought at first. Yuna pulled up more data. But look at what they're taking. Everything. The factories are being dismantled and shipped out. The mines are being stripped clean. They're even removing the agricultural equipment and the water processors. These aren't refugees running scared. This is systematic deconstruction. Thel's crystalline form pulsed with concern. They're preparing those worlds for abandonment, or preparing them to be indefensible. Either way, it means they expect something. Yuna switched to another display, this one showing fleet movements. Or rather, the lack of them. And there's this. The star chart showed human space, a region that had grown from 3 systems to 78 in just 150 years. Usually, it was marked with thousands of signals from human vessels. Cargo haulers, passenger ships, military patrols, science vessels. Humans moved constantly, restlessly, like they couldn't sit still. Now, the chart was almost empty. Oh, the civilian traffic continued at normal levels. But the military vessels, over 4,000 warships of various sizes, had simply vanished. Vanished where? Thel asked the question everyone in Concordance Intelligence wanted answered. We don't know. They didn't mass at any border. They didn't position for invasion or defense. They just disappeared from our tracking 3 weeks ago. Yuna felt cold despite the station's comfortable temperature. Sir, in my entire career studying humans, I've never seen them do anything quietly. They're loud. They broadcast everything. Even their military exercises are public knowledge because their free press reports on them. And now silence. Exactly. Which means whatever they're doing, they don't want us to see it. Thel drifted toward the door. Prepare a full report for the council. They need to understand the implications. After he left, Yuna stared at her screens for a long time. Somewhere out there, humanity was preparing something. And the fact that she couldn't figure out what it was terrified her more than any threat. Across the galaxy, on the Phrenoid homeworld of Nexus Prime, Ambassador Oneseek sat in his office and felt utterly useless. He had been humanity's diplomatic representative to the Phrenoids for 12 years. He had built relationships, established trade agreements, and genuinely believed he was helping build bridges between species. Now those Phrenoid contacts kept asking him the same question, and he had no answer to give them. What is Terra planning? High Coordinator Vexen's 4 arms gestured with unusual agitation. Phrenoids didn't usually show emotion, but the current situation had everyone rattled. Your government has stopped responding to our communications. Your merchant ships still dock at our ports, but the captains claim to know nothing. It has been 3 months since the summit. What are your people doing? Oneseek spread his hands helplessly. I don't know. Terra isn't responding to my requests for information either. That's impossible. You are their ambassador. I was their ambassador to you. Now I think I'm just a man who happens to be standing on your world when Terra decided to go silent. Oneseek had requested orders, explanations, anything. All he got back was a simple message. Continue normal operations. Await further instructions. Vexen's optical sensors focused intently on him. We calculate a 73% probability that your people are preparing military action. Our defense forces are mobilizing. To defend against what? We haven't threatened you. Exactly. You haven't threatened, haven't explained, haven't responded. In probability analysis, the unknown variable is the most dangerous one. Vexen leaned forward. Ambassador Onesick, I have always considered you truthful. So I ask you directly, as one person to another, should my people be afraid? Onesick wanted to say no. He wanted to reassure his friend that everything would be fine. But he remembered Ambassador Day's expression as he walked out of that conference hall. He remembered Commander Gina's hand on her weapon. He remembered the way Dr. Taesung had looked at the summit demands like they were a death sentence. I don't know, he said honestly, but I think maybe we should all be a little afraid of what we've pushed humanity to become. On the independent freighter Star of Incheon, Captain Hana docked at another port and faced another round of questions. This time it was the Kresh Port Authority, 3 massive beings who could crush her skull with one hand, but who checked cargo manifests with surprising delicacy. Captain, we must ask, what is your government planning? Hannah had heard this question at the last 5 ports. She gave the same answer. I honestly don't know. I'm a freighter captain. Terra doesn't share military secrets with civilians like me. But surely you must have heard something. Rumors? Speculation? Plenty of both. None of it reliable. Hana pulled up her cargo manifest, hoping to move the conversation along. I'm hauling medical supplies to Port Taijon. All legal, all inspected, all boring. The Kresh officer's small eyes studied her. Port Taijon. That colony is being evacuated, yes? Partially. Civilian population, non-essential personnel. Military and infrastructure crews are staying. Why? Hannah shrugged. Above my pay grade. Maybe they're worried about raids. Maybe it's just precautionary. Maybe someone in Terra Defense just likes moving people around. I just fly my ship where they pay me to fly it. But later, alone in her cabin as the ship traveled through hyperspace, Hannah looked at the private message she'd received from her brother. He was a lieutenant on a destroyer, and his message had been brief. Don't worry about me. We're building something amazing. Terra's got a plan. Trust Day. Building what? What could possibly require hiding 4,000 warships and evacuating colonies? What was amazing enough to justify walking away from galactic civilization? Hannah didn't know. But like everyone else, human and alien alike, she waited and wondered and worried Dot in the Concordance Council chambers. The Velrothi High Curator called an emergency session. Representatives from all major species attended, many of them demanding answers the curator couldn't provide. It has been 3 months, the Kresh representative growled. 3 months of silence from humanity. My people share 3 borders with human space. My defense forces are stretched thin, trying to monitor for threats we can't identify. The Threnoid Collective proposes a formal peace delegation, Vexen announced. We must re-establish communication. This silence is unsustainable. The curator's form pulsed with colors indicating deep thought. In its 3,000 years of existence, it had never faced a problem quite like this. Species who rejected concordance terms usually did so with bluster and threats. They declared independence loudly, dared the concordance to enforce its will, and generally made their positions clear. Humanity had done none of that. They had simply left, and in doing so, created a void of information that everyone was desperate to fill. Very well, the curator decided. We shall send a delegation to Earth, a proper diplomatic mission, requesting formal talks. Surely even in their anger, the humans will agree to dialogue. The vote was unanimous. For the first time in galactic history, it was the elder species who would ask the younger one for a meeting. The delegation departed 3 days later aboard the finest diplomatic vessel the Concordance possessed. It carried representatives from 8 species, all carefully chosen for their diplomatic skill and their previous positive interactions with humans. They jumped into the Sol system, home to Earth and the heart of human government, with messages of peace and reconciliation prepared in 12 languages. They transmitted their request on all frequencies. They asked politely for permission to approach Earth and open negotiations. They emphasized their peaceful intentions and their desire to find a solution that would satisfy everyone. The only response was an automated message, broadcast from a communications satellite in the outer solar system. The voice was pleasant, almost cheerful, spoken in perfect galactic standard. The United Terran Authority is currently unavailable for diplomatic contact. Please stand by. Stand by for what? The question hung unanswered as the delegation's ship drifted in space, waiting for a response that never came. Back on Axiom Prime, Una received the report of the delegation's reception and felt her fear deepen into something approaching dread. She pulled up her long-term analysis of human behavior patterns and stared at the conclusion she'd reached weeks ago, but had been afraid to voice. Humans, she had learned, fell into two categories when threatened. Most would fight. They'd make noise, threaten back, posture and display like any other species. But some humans, the really dangerous ones, went quiet. They stopped talking and started planning. They stopped threatening and started preparing. And when they finally acted, it was with a precision and determination that shocked everyone who'd mistaken their silence for weakness. Terra had gone quiet. The galaxy was about to learn what that meant. The Threnoid scout vessel probability matrix had been mapping unexplored regions. For 3 weeks, when its sensors detected something impossible. Scout Commander Sung Ho sat in his monitoring station, hidden in an asteroid field 2 light years away, and watched the Threnoid ship's telemetry with satisfaction. Everything was going according to plan. Terra had known someone would eventually stumble onto one of the construction sites. Better it be the Threnoids, who would calculate and analyze rather than panic and shoot. The Threnoid crew's communications were easy to intercept. Sung Ho listened as they tried to make sense of what their instruments were telling them. This structure should not exist. The Threnoid captain transmitted back to Nexus Prime. The energy signature alone exceeds our largest battle station by a factor of 40. But this region of space was marked as empty on all concordance charts. Sung Ho allowed himself a small smile. Of course, it had been marked empty. Humans had been very careful about which regions they requested to survey over the past decade. Very careful indeed. The structure appears to be human in origin, the Threnoid science officer reported. Construction materials match known human alloys, but the manufacturing techniques are unknown. The precision at this scale should not be possible with their technology level. Should not be possible with the technology level. Humans had publicly demonstrated. Sung Ho corrected silently. There was a considerable difference. The Threnoids continued their scans, and Sung Ho watched them discover what Terra had intended them to discover. The structure wasn't alone. Their long-range sensors began picking up similar energy signatures throughout human space. First 10, then 20, then 43 distinct locations, all precisely positioned in a pattern that suggested deliberate planning. This is a network, the Threnoid captain said, and Sung Ho could hear the concern in the translated voice. These structures are linked somehow. The spacing is too perfect to be coincidental. Sung Ho checked his own instruments. The Threnoids were good. He'd give them that. It had taken them only 6 hours to map most of the network. Of course, they'd only found the ones Terra wanted them to find. The complete network was 3 times larger and far more complex. The Threnoid ship transmitted its findings directly to Concordance Intelligence. Within an hour, every major species knew that humanity had built something massive and mysterious while the galaxy wasn't looking. On the intelligence station, Una stared at the Threnoid data and felt her world shift. She had been right to be afraid. Each structure is drawing power directly from nearby stars, she explained to Curator Thel. The energy collection systems alone represent technology we don't possess. But the power isn't being used. It's being stored. Or distributed. The readings suggest both. What are they for? Thel asked. Unknown. But the positioning is too precise to be random. Look. Una pulled up a three-dimensional map of human space with all 43 detected structures marked. They form a grid pattern. Each one is equidistant from its neighbors. Each one covers a specific volume of space. It's like they're setting up some kind of coverage area. A weapon system? Maybe. But if so, why build them in the middle of their own space? These aren't positioned to defend borders. They're distributed throughout human territory. Una zoomed in on one structure. And the power requirements are excessive for weapons. Unless they're planning to shoot at something the size of a planet, they've got more power than they'd ever need. A junior analyst named Bauram spoke up hesitantly. What if they're not weapons? What if they're gates? Everyone turned to look at him. The young analyst brought up a theoretical paper from the Human Scientific Database. Published 8 years ago by a Dr. Ji Su at the Terra Institute for Applied Physics. This paper discusses theoretical quantum gate technology, using linked stations to create instantaneous transportation corridors. The energy requirements match what we're seeing. And if you arrange the gates in a grid pattern, you could create a transportation network that covers an entire region of space. Una felt her blood run cold. How many people have read this paper? According to the database, 7,000 downloads. It was published openly in a peer-reviewed journal. 7,000 downloads over 8 years, lost among millions of other human scientific papers. The concordance scientific community monitored human research, but they couldn't track everything. They'd missed this. Everyone had missed this. If this is a gate network, Una said slowly, then humanity has just made all existing transportation technology obsolete. Jump drives, hyperspace lanes, everything. They could move ships, cargo, people, instantly across their entire space. But that's impossible, another analyst protested. The theoretical barriers alone were apparently solved by humans 8 years ago, and nobody noticed. Una pulled up more data. Look at human scientific output over the past decade. Their papers on quantum mechanics, materials science, energy systems. They've been publishing everything openly, but scattered across hundreds of journals and databases. Nobody was connecting the dots. Until now, Thel said quietly. And now we understand why they walked away from the summit. They don't need us anymore. Dr. Minnow sat in her office at the Valrathi Central Library and read Una's report 3 times. As one of the Concordance's leading experts on human culture, she'd been asked to analyze what this discovery meant for humanity's future intentions. The answer frightened her. She composed her report carefully, knowing the curator would read every word. The Gateway Network represents more than technological achievement, she wrote. It represents philosophical independence. Humans have solved their transportation problems without Concordance help. Their distributed construction pattern suggests they've solved energy distribution as well. The material science required suggests advanced manufacturing far beyond what they've publicly demonstrated. In essence, humanity has quietly developed the infrastructure for complete self-sufficiency. They don't need Concordance trade routes. They don't need our hyperspace navigation data. They don't need our technological exchanges. They have built the foundation for an isolated civilization that can thrive without external contact. But here is what truly concerns me. They didn't do this in secret. They published their research. They invited collaboration. For 8 years, this information was available to anyone who cared to look. We simply didn't care to look. We were too busy debating how to control their expansion to notice they were evolving past the need for our control. The summit wasn't about containing a threat. It was about maintaining our relevance. And by demanding submission instead of offering partnership, we forced them to choose independence. Min-Ah paused, considering whether to include her next conclusion. She decided the curator needed to hear the full truth. I believe the Gateway Network is only the visible portion of humanity's preparations. Species don't develop single technologies in isolation. If they've solved quantum gates, they've likely solved the supporting technologies as well. Advanced computing, quantum communications, zero-point energy extraction. Each one of these represents a fundamental shift in capability. The humans didn't walk away from the summit in anger. They walked away because we'd already become irrelevant to their future, and we were too blind to see it. She sent the report and sat back, exhausted. Through her office window, she could see the Velrathi homeworld below, capital of an empire that had stood for 10,000 years. An empire that suddenly seemed very old and very fragile. On Terra, in a secure facility deep beneath the Swiss mountains, Ambassador Day read the intercepted concordance reports with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. They found the network, Commander Gina reported, standing at attention before his desk. The Threnoid stumbled onto Site 17 6 hours ago. By now, all the major species know about it. Good. And the fleet? Still hidden in the deep dark. The gate system isn't fully operational yet, but we're ahead of schedule. Dr. Jisoo says we'll be ready in 2 weeks. Day nodded slowly. 2 weeks until humanity could move its entire military fleet instantly to any point in human space. 2 weeks until the Concordance's careful calculations about human military capacity became utterly meaningless. Sir, do you think they'll try something before then? Gina asked. Test our defenses while they think we're still vulnerable? Oh, I'm certain of it. Day pulled up a star chart, showing Concordance fleet positions. The Velrathi especially. They've never been defied before. Their pride won't let this stand. They'll send a fleet to one of our colonies, probably New Pyongyang, and demand we comply with the original summit terms. And if they do? Day's smile was cold. Then we'll give them a demonstration they'll never forget. Sometimes you have to show people what power really means before they'll respect it. In orbit around New Pyongyang, Captain Su Min received updated orders from Terra Defense. She read them twice, then called her senior officers to the command center of Orbital Station 7. We've been designated as the demonstration site, she told them. Terra expects the Velrathi to come here within the week. When they arrive, we are not to fire first under any circumstances. But we are not to stand down either. Seems like a contradiction, Captain, her tactical officer said. It's not. We're going to show them something that changes the rules of engagement so completely that firing won't be necessary. Su Min pulled up the specifications for the gate network. In 6 days, this station will become the most important strategic position in human space. And the Velrathi are going to learn what happens when you threaten us in our own home. She looked out at the colony world below, at the millions of humans who'd built lives here on this distant world. They'd come here to be free, to build something new, to reach for the stars. And the Concordance had demanded they give it all up, bow their heads, and accept subordination. Hera had other plans. The galaxy had discovered humanity's network. Soon they would discover what that network could really do. And then the trembling would really begin. A Velrathi enforcement fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the new Pyongyang system with all the confidence of 10,000 years of unquestioned power. 300 ships, each one a masterpiece of technology that had taken centuries to perfect. The fleet represented more firepower than most species possessed in their entire military. Commander Talvex reviewed the tactical situation from the flagship's command sphere. One human colony world. Orbital stations with minimal defensive capabilities. No significant military presence detected. This would be simple. Transmit our demands, Talvex ordered. The message broadcast across all frequencies, in human languages and galactic standard. The colony of New Pyongyang would immediately submit to Concordance authority. All human military personnel would surrender. The colony would accept Concordance governors and oversight. Compliance was expected within 1 standard hour. On Orbital Station 7, Captain Su Min listened to the demands with her crew gathered around her. The station trembled slightly as the Velrathi fleet's sensor sweeps washed over them. Invasive and arrogant. 58 minutes until we're cleared to respond. Her tactical officer said quietly. Su Min nodded. Terra's orders had been specific. Let them make their demands. Let them feel confident. Then show them the truth. She opened a channel to the surface. Governor Lee, begin evacuation protocols. Get everyone to the shelters. Already underway, Captain. We've been drilling for this. Everyone will be secure in 30 minutes. Below, on the colony world, 2 million humans moved with practiced efficiency into reinforced shelters. Not panicking. Not running. Just following the plan that Terra had prepared months ago. Lieutenant, Yoon monitored the Concordance communication channels from her listening post. The Velrathi weren't even bothering to encrypt their transmissions. Why would they? They were the most powerful military force in the galaxy. They had nothing to fear from primitive humans. She listened to Commander Talvex reviewing attack protocols with the fleet, already planning how to disable the human defenses if they were foolish enough to resist. The arrogance was stunning. These beings had controlled the galaxy for so long, they'd forgotten what real opposition felt like. 30 minutes to authorization, Un reported to her commanding officer. The Velrathi are positioning for orbital bombardment. They think we're going to fold. Let them think it, her commander replied. Terra knows what they're doing. Back on the station, Su Min watched the countdown. 45 minutes had passed. The Velrathi fleet had tightened its formation around New Pyongyang. Sensors locked onto the orbital stations and the colony below. They were prepared to make an example of this world, to show the galaxy what happened when you defied the Concordance. 15 minutes. Remaining got Su Min's hands were steady as she entered her authorization codes. Around her, every officer on the station did the same. This wasn't just about defending one colony. This was about showing the galaxy who humanity had become. All evacuation complete, Governor Lee reported. The colony is secure. Fleets demanding our surrender again, the communications officer said. They sound impatient. 10 minutes. 5 minutes dot, then the countdown reached 0, and Su Min spoke 4 words into her headset. Terra Defense, authorize activation. The space around New Pyongyang began to shimmer. On the Velrathi flagship, every sensor suddenly screamed warnings. Talvex's consciousness expanded in alarm as readings poured in that made no sense. Space itself was distorting, not in one location, but in dozens of points around the planet. What is happening? Talvex demanded. Unknown energy patterns. Massive power buildup. Readings are off all scales. The science officer's translated voice was sharp with confusion. Commander, I'm detecting quantum distortions throughout the system. The humans are activating something. The quantum gates came online with a sound like reality tearing. Not loud, silent actually in the vacuum of space. But every sensor and consciousness in the system felt it. A fundamental shift in the fabric of space-time. The human fleet materialized. One moment, empty space. The next moment, 800 warships in perfect formation, surrounding the Velrathi fleet from every direction. Not approaching, not arriving through hyperspace. Just suddenly there, as if they'd always been there, and everyone had simply failed to notice. Admiral Tae-young's face appeared on every Velrothi ship's display. He looked tired, like a man who'd been working long hours and would rather be sleeping. But his eyes were hard as diamonds. Velrothi Fleet, this is Admiral Tae-young of Terra Defense. You've come to our home and threatened our people. You have 1 hour to leave our system. This is your only warning. Talvex's crystalline form pulsed with what in humans would have been laughter. Admiral, we count 300 vessels in our fleet. You have 800, yes, but we possess superior technology. Our shields are impenetrable. Our weapons can crack planets. You cannot match us ship to ship. You're right, Tae-young agreed. Ship to ship, you'd probably win. But you seem to be confused about the numbers. He nodded to someone off screen. The gates pulsed again. The 800 ships became 8,000. Then another pulse. 80,000. Then more, until the Velrothi sensors couldn't count them all. Just registered an impossible mass of human warships appearing from nowhere, filling the space around New Pyongyang like a swarm of angry insects. Every ship humanity had built over the past century. Every destroyer, cruiser, carrier, and frigate. Every patrol boat and fast attack craft. Every single vessel that had disappeared from concordance sensors 3 months ago. All of them here, now, instantly. This is impossible, Talvex whispered, but the sensors didn't lie. Your technology gave you powerful ships, Tae-young said, his voice calm. Our technology means we don't need to choose where to deploy those ships. We can deploy all of them, everywhere, instantly. You came to our colony with 300 vessels. We just countered with our entire fleet. And we didn't even need travel time to get them here. On the Velrothi flagship's tactical display, the situation was clear. They were surrounded by a force hundreds of times their size, with no way to retreat before being cut off. The humans hadn't just achieved tactical superiority. They'd achieved something that made traditional military calculations meaningless. You're bluffing, Talvex said, but uncertainty crept into the translated voice. You wouldn't fire on a concordance fleet. It would mean war with the entire galaxy. You're right, we won't fire, Tae-young agreed. Not on you. You haven't attacked us yet. But you need to understand something, Commander. We didn't build this network to conquer. We built it to be free. And if you try to take that freedom away, you'll discover just how far humanity is willing to go to keep it. Su Min watched from her station as the Velrothi fleet hesitated. 300 ships, powerful and proud, surrounded by a force they couldn't hope to match. She felt no satisfaction, only a deep weariness. This shouldn't have been necessary. If the Concordance had just offered partnership instead of chains, none of this would be happening. Commander Talvex is requesting permission to withdraw, the communications officer reported. Granted, Tae-young said immediately. But there's one more thing they need to see. One more demonstration. He gave an order that Su Min had been briefed on, but still found hard to believe. All ships, execute jump pattern Delta. Target coordinates, Velreith home system. The human fleet vanished from New Pyongyang. For 3 seconds, the Velrothi fleet was alone in the system. Then sensors across the galaxy picked up an impossible signature. The entire human fleet had appeared in orbit around the Velrothi homeworld, 300 light-years away. Not near it. Not approaching it. In orbit, close enough at the Velrothi. Civilians on the surface could see them with telescopes. 80,000 warships circling the heart of the Velrothi Empire. Weapons cold. Shields down. Just orbiting peacefully for exactly 60 seconds, while the Velrothi defense fleet scrambled to respond to the impossible invasion. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, the human ships vanished again. Another gate jump. Back to New Pyongyang, where the stunned Velrothi enforcement fleet still sat, trying to process what had just happened. Tae-young's message was brief. We could have fired. We didn't. We could have attacked your homeworld while your fleet was here threatening ours. We didn't. We can reach anywhere in the galaxy in seconds, and you can't stop us. But we don't want war. We just want you to leave us alone. Now get out of our system. The Velrothi fleet retreated, not in panic, but in shocked silence. They jumped to hyperspace and fled back to concordance space, where they would report what they'd seen to the High Curator Dot in the command center of Orbital Station 7. Su-min's crew erupted in cheers. They'd faced down the most powerful fleet in the galaxy and won without firing a shot. But Su-min didn't cheer. She just looked out at the stars and wondered what they'd started. Humanity had just demonstrated power that made the old rules irrelevant. The question was whether the Concordance would accept that, or whether this was just the beginning of something worse. On Terra, Ambassador Day received the report of the successful demonstration. He felt no triumph, only relief. It had worked. Humanity had shown strength without slaughter, power without cruelty. They'd proved their point without starting a war, but he knew this was only the beginning. The real test would come in the months ahead, when the Concordance decided how to respond to a universe where humanity could no longer be controlled. The demonstration was over. Now came the consequences. 1 year after humanity walked away from the talks, Ambassador Day returned to Axiom Prime. His hair had gone whiter, and new lines marked his face. But he walked with the same steady confidence he'd shown when he left. This time, no one kept him waiting. The Concordance chamber was packed, every species sending representatives. Even minor species who'd never attended before had requested seats. Everyone wanted to see what would happen when humanity returned. They stood at the same spot where he'd stood a year ago, when they'd demanded humanity submit. The difference was striking. Then, he'd stood before judges. Now, he stood before equals who were trying very hard to pretend they'd always seen him that way. The Velrothi High Curator spoke first, its crystalline form pulsing with carefully neutral colors. Ambassador Day, we welcome your return. The Concordance has spent considerable time discussing the events of the past year. We acknowledge that perhaps our approach to human integration was imperfect. Day said nothing, waiting for the real words behind the diplomatic language. We propose a revised agreement, the curator continued. Human sovereignty over your current territories would be recognized. Your military capabilities would remain unrestricted. In exchange, you would agree to coordination with Concordance Defense Forces and share your transportation technology under mutually beneficial terms. It was a better offer. Much better. It acknowledged human equality and offered real partnership. A year ago, Day would have been thrilled to receive such terms. Now, he shook his head slowly. No. The word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Around the chamber, aliens shifted uncomfortably. The Crush representative leaned forward. Ambassador, we don't understand. These terms are generous. We're offering everything you wanted. You're offering what we wanted a year ago, they replied. Before you demanded we submit. Before you tried to force us into chains. Before you sent a fleet to threaten our colony. He looked around the chamber, meeting eyes and sensors. We came to the stars seeking friendship. We found hierarchy. We came offering cooperation. We were offered subordination. So we walked away, not in anger, but in disappointment. Commander Gina stood beside him, and when she spoke, her voice was firm. Terra Defense has no interest in conquest. We're not expanding beyond our current borders. We're not seeking conflict. But we're also not rejoining a system that sees us as subjects rather than equals. Then what do you want? The Threnoid representative's 4 arms gestured in confusion. You return to refuse our offers. You demonstrate military supremacy, but claim peaceful intent. Your actions don't follow predictable patterns. Dr. Tae-Soong stepped forward, adjusting his glasses in a nervous habit that hadn't changed. We want nothing from you. That's what you're not understanding. We wanted partnership, but you offered control. So we built our own path. Now we're simply here to inform you of our next steps. He activated a holographic display showing the gateway network. But not the version the Concordance had discovered. The complete version with 3 times as many gates and capabilities that made the earlier demonstrations look like children's toys. This is the full Terra-Gate network, Tae-Soong explained. We've completed construction 2 months ahead of schedule. It provides instantaneous transportation throughout human space and beyond. Range is effectively unlimited. Capacity exceeds our current needs by a factor of 10. The display shifted, showing technical specifications in detail. Not summary data, but complete engineering blueprints. We're releasing these specifications publicly, Tae-Soong continued. Every species in this chamber will receive a complete technical package. No patents, no restrictions, no licensing fees. Anyone who wants to build this technology can do so freely. A chamber erupted in chaos. The elder species representatives shouted over each other, their translations creating a cacophony of disbelief and outrage. The Velrothi curator's form flashed through colors never seen before. This is madness. The curator's voice boomed. You're giving away technology that represents thousands of years of advancement? This will destroy the economic balance of the galaxy. Yes, they agreed simply. It will. The economic balance that kept younger species dependent on elder species for hyperspace navigation. The balance that made you essential middlemen in all galactic trade. That balance is over. Ambassador Oneseek, who had spent a year trying to bridge the gap between his people and the Threnoids, spoke quietly but clearly. You asked what guarantees you have that we won't use our power against you. The answer is the same guarantee you gave us. None. Welcome to equality. The Kresh representative stood, its massive form somehow managing to look uncertain. But why? Why share this freely? You could have controlled galactic commerce, charged access fees, built an empire on this technology. Because we don't want an empire, Gina said. We want freedom. And the best way to secure our freedom is to make sure everyone else has the same capabilities we do. Can't threaten us with isolation if you can travel as easily as we can. Can't force us into trade agreements if you have your own self-sufficient infrastructure. Yuna, sitting in the observer's section, understood immediately what humanity had done. They hadn't just refused the Concordance's control. They'd made that control impossible. By giving away their technological advantage, they'd eliminated the power imbalance entirely. No one could threaten humanity with sanctions or isolation if everyone had the same tools. It was brilliant. And it completely undermined 10,000 years of concordant structure. Over the following months, 17 species downloaded the gateway specifications and began construction. The younger species moved fastest, eager for independence from the established trade routes. The Kresh Confederacy built their first gate within 2 months. The Palaran Republic followed 3 weeks later. The economic impact was immediate and dramatic. Traditional shipping companies collapsed. Hyperspace navigators found their skills obsolete. Trade patterns that had existed for millennia shifted overnight. The carefully maintained hierarchy of the Concordance, where elder species controlled access to technology and infrastructure, began to crumble. The elder species tried to maintain control, but they had no leverage. They couldn't threaten economic sanctions against species who no longer needed their shipping lanes. They couldn't restrict access to technology It was freely available to anyone. They couldn't enforce their will on species who could now move military forces as easily as humanity could. The galaxy was restructuring itself, and there was nothing the Concordance could do to stop it. 5 years after the summit, Terra hosted the first Galactic Fair Summit. Not a governing body, but an open forum where any species could propose ideas, share technology, and build partnerships based on mutual interest rather than hierarchical obligation. 63 species attended. The Velrothi sent a small delegation, quiet and humble in a way that would have been unthinkable 5 years earlier. They requested technical assistance with upgrading their aging infrastructure. Humanity provided it freely, with no strings attached and no reminders of past conflicts. The Threnoids came with proposals for joint scientific research. The Kresh suggested cultural exchange programs. Younger species, freed from the economic control of their elders, brought innovations and perspectives that had been suppressed under the old system. It wasn't perfect. Old grudges remained. Economic disruption had caused hardship for many. Some species struggled to adapt to a galaxy where ancient privilege no longer guaranteed status. There were conflicts, misunderstandings, and moments of tension, but it was better. More open, more equal, more hopeful. Captain Hana, no longer interrogated at every port, delivered cargo to a Threnoid colony and was invited to share a meal with the governor. They talked about trade routes and music and the strange foods humans enjoyed. Just people talking, without the weight of hierarchy pressing down on them. Yuna wrote her final report on human behavior patterns, concluding with an observation that would be studied by xenosociologists for generations. Humanity didn't defeat the Concordance through force. They rendered it unnecessary through generosity. By giving away their advantage, they gained something more valuable than control. They gained genuine partnership. On Earth, in his modest apartment in Seoul, Ambassador Day watched news feeds from across the galaxy. Species were building gates, forming new alliances, creating innovations that the stagnant old order had never allowed. Young races were finally getting the chance to prove themselves. Elder species were learning to contribute through merit rather than mandate. A journalist requested an interview, wanting to know if he regretted walking away from that summit 5 years ago. They thought about the question carefully before answering. He thought about the months of silence when the galaxy trembled in uncertainty. He thought about the demonstration at New Pyongyang, the stunned Velrothi fleet, the fear in every alien's voice when they asked what humanity was planning. He thought about the risk they'd taken, the gamble that humanity could advance fast enough and far enough to make independence viable. The countless hours of work by millions of humans, building something the galaxy had never seen. No, he finally answered. I don't regret it. Sometimes the greatest power isn't forcing others to listen. It's having the confidence to walk away when they won't, and then building something so undeniable that they have to acknowledge you as equals. The journalist asked one more question. What's next for humanity? Now that you've changed the galaxy, what's your next goal? Day smiled. The same goal we've always had. To explore, to learn, to grow, to reach for the stars and see what we can become. The difference is, now we're doing it on our own terms. And we're inviting everyone else to join us as partners, not subjects. Across the galaxy, the old order continued its slow transformation into something new. The Concordance still existed, but as a forum for discussion rather than a seat of power. Species that had been subordinate for centuries were finding their voices. Technologies that had been hoarded were being shared. The future was uncertain, but it was open in a way it hadn't been for 10,000 years. Humanity had walked away from the talks. The galaxy had trembled in uncertainty. And in that trembling, something better had been born. Not a new empire to replace the old one, but a new way of existing together, equal, open, free. It wasn't the ending anyone had expected when Ambassador Day turned his back on the Concordance Chamber. But as he'd learned long ago in his decades of diplomatic service, the best outcomes rarely came from following the expected path. Sometimes you had to walk away. Sometimes you had to build something new. And sometimes the scariest thing you could do to those in power was simply refuse to accept that they had power over you. The galaxy had learned that lesson, and in learning it had become something greater than it had been. The talks had failed, but humanity had succeeded, and in their success, they'd lifted everyone else up with them. That, Day thought as he watched the stars through his window, was worth all the uncertainty and fear. Worth walking away. Worth the risk. Worth everything.